Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the shadowy stone corridors of a medieval monastery, where the scent of damp wool, candle wax, and something, a little riper, fills the air. You pad slowly across the cold flagstones, ducking under arches carved by hands long gone, and there, in the flickering torchlight, you see it, a humble wheel of cheese. Innocent. Smelly. And according to the monks, wise. Yes, this stinky, lumpy thing is about to predict the weather. You might have thought weather forecasting started with satellites or at least barometers. But no, long before apps and anchors in suits, there were monks. Robed, barefoot, a little underfed, and utterly convinced that cheese, if watched carefully, could whisper tomorrow's forecast. You probably won't survive this logic, but let's trudge on anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of YouTube reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stepping into the scriptorium after dark. It's quiet, save for the scratch of quills and the occasional sneeze. Parchment dust is no joke. But tonight's not about copying ancient texts. Tonight, you're following Brother Aldrich, a monk with a suspiciously red nose and a deep fondness for dairy. He's muttering about storms, leading you past the chapel, past the cloister garden, and down a narrow stairwell. The air gets colder, thicker. You duck your head as the stone ceiling drops lower. And then, there it is. The cheese cellar. Low shelves grown with wheels of cheddar, Gouda, and something blue-green that should probably be classified as a living organism. Brother Aldrich moves confidently among them, his candle bobbing like a firefly. He taps one wheel with a knuckle, sniffs another, then stops and frowns. This one's sweating, he mutters. Rain by morning. Yes, monks like Aldrich genuinely believed cheese could forecast weather. It wasn't madness, at least not by medieval standards. They noticed patterns. A cheese that stayed dry in summer but suddenly sweated meant humidity was rising. If the rind cracked, a cold front was on its way. And if the smell turned sharper overnight, something stormy was probably brewing. The cheese spoke. And the monks listened. The 13th century was big on signs, divine ones, natural ones, fermented ones. People saw omens in everything, how chickens laid eggs, how comets burned across the sky, and yes, how cheese behaved on a Thursday. When you didn't understand meteorology, you reached for meaning anywhere you could find it. And monks had plenty of time to observe. Most monasteries were self-sufficient. They made their own bread, beer, soap, and of course, cheese. Lots of it. Not just for themselves, but for trade. That meant they had cellars full of experimental wheels in every stage of aging. And aging cheese? It reacts dramatically to changes in the environment. Here's where modern science peeks in for a sleepy cameo. Changes in barometric pressure and humidity do affect how cheese looks, feels, and smells. Moisture condenses. Rinds expand or split. Bacteria colonies shift their behavior. These are the facts monks didn't know, but they noticed the signs all the same. They just wrapped it in God. If a cheese will crack loudly during Vespers, it wasn't physics, it was divine timing. And let's be honest, if you were holed up in a monastery with no TikTok and only a cold wheel of Gouda for company, you'd start to imagine it was talking to you, too. Now, there were rules. You couldn't just sniff a random cheese and call yourself a weather monk. Brother Aldrich insists on at least 6 months of observation. A young cheese lies, he explains. It hasn't seen enough weather yet. So the older wheels, those with character, those who've survived a harsh winter or two, become the trusted forecasters. One wheel, affectionately called Margaret, has been sitting on the top shelf since last autumn. She's crusty, slightly lopsided, and revered like an oracle. If Margaret sweats before dawn, you bring in the drying herbs. If she shrinks back in her rind, expect a frost. If she cracks and groans, batten the shutters. You sit for a moment, watching candlelight flicker across the mottled surface of Margaret's rind. It's oddly comforting, in this quiet chamber, to imagine the world outside explained by dairy. No chaotic clouds or unpredictable storms, just cheese with opinions. Of course, not every monk bought into the cheese myth. There were skeptics, usually younger ones, who mumbled about coincidence. But in a world where rain could mean ruined crops and hungry winters, even a half-right prediction was gold. And cheese had a decent track record, probably better than that guy in your town who swears his knee pain can predict rain. Historians still argue whether monks truly believed in the cheese's power or just used it to control nervous villagers. Maybe it was both. After all, if you were the only person in your area with a cellar full of weather-sensitive wheels, and a mysterious book of notes scrawled in Latin, you'd seem pretty impressive. Especially if your cheese called the storm before the sky did. A distant rumble echoes from above. Thunder. You glance back at Margaret. She glistens faintly in the candlelight. Brother Aldrich smiles. Told you, he says, wiping his hands on his robe. You're not sure if he's a wizard or just a good observer, but either way, he's convinced. And now, as the wind picks up outside, you settle deeper into the stone silence, surrounded by monks and mold and the unshakable belief that cheese, sweaty, fragrant, ancient cheese, holds the secrets of tomorrow's sky. You wake, or maybe you never really slept, still in that low, musty chamber where stone arches press in like the belly of a sleeping beast. The candle has burned down to a stub, and Brother Aldrich is gone. But the cheese remains. You push yourself upright and stretch your legs, careful not to knock over any sacred curd. Today, you're heading deeper into the monastery's underbelly. Not metaphorically. Literally. The cheese cellar has levels. Down a spiral staircase that would absolutely not pass modern safety codes, you descend into what feels like the earth's stomach. The air grows cooler, moister, thick with the scent of ripening dairy and old stone. The walls here weep with condensation, and you're surrounded on all sides by wooden racks sagging under the weight of cheese wheels in every size and hue. Orange, brown, off-white, mold-flecked green. Some wrapped in cloth, others crusted in herbs, and a few oozing slightly from under their cracked skins. This is the monastic heart of the forecast, the sacred archive of edible meteorology. Each cheese has a name. Not a label, not a type. A name. Beatrice, Reginald, Old Thistle, St. Florentine. Some wheels are marked with faint carvings or inked on dates that go back 20, even 30 years. Of course, by now, they're inedible. But to the monks, that's beside the point. These wheels aren't food anymore. They're relics. You crouch beside a particularly large wheel named Thomas the Meek. He smells less meek than you'd expect, pungent, with a sharp tang that stings the nose. A note beside him, faded and barely legible, reads, "Cracked thrice before St. Michael's Day storm." There's reverence in the handwriting, the same kind you'd expect in a saint's biography. This is how the monks treated their forecasting wheels, not as mere foodstuffs, but as participants in divine revelation. They believed the cheese had memory. That it remembered past storms, and if treated well, turned regularly, kept at stable temperatures, never shouted at, yes, seriously, it would offer its guidance again. One monk, Brother Caldus, even wrote a tiny treatise arguing that older cheese became more spiritually attuned to the elements. His thesis: cheese holds the breath of past rains. Historians still argue whether Caldus was metaphorical or just deeply sleep-deprived. Probably both. This was the rhythm of the cellar: observe, record, interpret. Every day, one or two monks descended here like scientists in itchy wool robes. They would poke the cheese with narrow wooden sticks called taps, not to taste, but to listen. The sound of the stick sliding in and out supposedly changed depending on moisture in the air. A squeaky tap meant dry weather. A muffled one. Rain. They'd also sniff for changes. Some cheeses released sharper aromas before humidity spiked. Others would sweat visibly along the rind when pressure dropped. And there were the cracks, hairline fractures that widened or closed depending on the climate. Of course, a lot of this was trial and error, heavy on the error. But the monks were nothing if not consistent. Over decades, they built up scrolls full of cheese behavior to weather correlations. Patterns emerged. Wheels that consistently predicted summer storms earned nicknames like the Prophet or Rain Tongue. It's here you come across the Cheese Chronicle, a wide parchment ledger bound in goat hide. Inside, neat Latin entries march down the page like an anxious grocery list. April 4, 1212, Brother Simon reports damp rind on Avellini. Light showers followed 2 days later. May 19, 1213, Old William emitted sharp tang at matins. No storm followed. Cheese likely anxious. Yes. That last one is real. Well, as real as these monks believed. Sometimes, the cheese got it wrong. And when it did, monks didn't necessarily blame the dairy. They blamed themselves. Perhaps they hadn't turned it at the proper hour. Perhaps someone had cursed near it, or eaten onions too close to its shelf. Some even fasted for days, hoping their purity would allow the cheese to speak clearer. There was even a short-lived monastic belief that cheese could be emotionally influenced. Brother Emmerich, in the late 1200s, insisted that calm chanting near the wheels improved forecast accuracy. He sang to them, long, slow psalms in the dark. Others scoffed until one particularly musical Gouda correctly predicted a hailstorm that flattened the herb garden. After that, Emmerich got his own corner of the cellar, and a lot more silence from the critics. You trail a finger across a particularly old will labeled Joan the Honest. Her rind is cracked but steady. No scent today, no sweat, no weep. Joan says clear skies. You're oddly reassured. Historians still debate whether these forecasting cellars were widespread or unique to a few eccentric orders. Some say it was a regional oddity, born from monks who simply had too much cheese and not enough drama. Others argue that fragments of cheese-based forecasting lore pop up all across Europe, disguised in folk sayings and bizarre harvest rituals. What is clear is that the monks took it seriously. And when the cheese predicted a storm, the monastery listened. That meant moving vulnerable herbs indoors, reinforcing the thatch on leaky corners, or delaying travel by a day or two. In an era where a wrong guess could lead to crop rot or sick pilgrims, even a half-believable omen was worth following. You lean back against the damp wall, the chill of the stone seeping through your tunic. Above you, the wheels creak softly as the wooden shelves settle. Maybe it's just the building. Or maybe, the cheese is whispering. A tiny draft stirs the candle's flame, and for a moment, you swear Joan the Honest shivers. You chuckle. You're buying in, aren't you? You've spent a good part of the night in a cold cave listening to fermented milk products. And somehow, it's beginning to make a weird kind of sense. You emerge from the cheese cellar feeling like you've aged a year yourself, your fingers are pruny from the damp, and your brain smells faintly of camembert. The stone stairwell is steep, but you trudge upward, blinking as sunlight filters through narrow stained glass above. Morning has arrived, pale and quiet, with a breeze that tugs lightly at your robe. Joan the Honest was right. The skies are clear. Back above ground, you pass through the cloister, where vines snake lazily up limestone columns and bees hum as they hover near lavender. But this moment of peace doesn't last long. You're summoned to the chapter house, a large vaulted room where monks gather for readings, decisions, and the daily cheese report. Yes, it's a real thing. Each morning, just after lauds, a monk steps forward with weather notes based on cheese observation. It's delivered in the same solemn tone as scripture. Today's reader is Brother Matthias, who, despite an unfortunate tendency to sneeze during key moments, has been entrusted with interpreting Margaret, Joan, and the lesser cheeses. You sit cross-legged on a cold stone bench as Matthias clears his throat. Margaret wept slightly before dawn, he begins, but did not crack. Joan the Honest remained still. No scent was reported from Timothy the Mild. He pauses dramatically. Conclusion, mild wind from the west, with evening dampness. The monks nod, murmuring in agreement. A few scribble in their notebooks. One adjusts the angle of a sundial outside. No one questions it. For them, cheese is part of the natural order, like birds flying south or Brother Benedict falling asleep during psalm recitations. You wonder if there's a moment, any moment, when someone long ago first noticed cheese behaving strangely before a storm. Was it just one monk, left alone with too much dairy and too few hobbies? Or did it grow slowly, an accumulation of small, stinky observations? There's a peculiar entry in the monastery's older records. You find it later in the library, tucked into the margin of a psalter. On the eve of St. Columba, the cheddar did split and stink. Thunder struck the bell tower. God warned us thus. That's it. A 500-year-old weather report disguised as theology. But perhaps that's how it all began, cheese breaking wind before a divine smack of thunder. Modern scholars, of course, raise their eyebrows. Some claim the monks simply saw what they wanted to see. The human brain loves patterns, even when they're total nonsense. If you stare at a cheese long enough, you will start to notice something. Anything. Oh, the mold's growing faster on the east side. Must be a cold snap coming. Sure, Steve. Or maybe you just turned it sideways yesterday. Still, science does have something to say here. Barometric pressure changes really can cause aged cheese to sweat or crack. Rinds respond to humidity. Gases trapped inside semi-soft wheels shift with temperature. If you're observant, and monks were nothing if not observant, you might be able to make a few educated guesses. But then there's the stranger stuff. Brother Arnold, for instance, once claimed a cheese hummed the night before a hailstorm. A low vibration, as if disturbed by the heavens, he wrote. Naturally, no one else heard it, but Arnold insisted. He tried to recreate the conditions by warming the cheese and setting it on a hollow log. All he got was a gooey mess and a week of cellar cleanup duty. Historians still argue whether Arnold was a visionary or just hard of hearing. Then there's the tale of the ghost cheese. Yes. Ghost. Cheese. Supposedly, in one Bavarian monastery, a will left near a graveyard began to mold in a perfect spiral the night before a lightning strike killed 3 crows in a nearby tree. Was it cursed? Possessed? Or just a really unlucky Gouda? The monks didn't take chances. They buried the wheel in the garden and planted rosemary on top. To this day, that particular monastery still refuses to age cheese outdoors. Of course, not every monastic order was so dramatic. Some were practical. They used cheese as one of several forecasting tools, alongside wind vanes, animal behavior, and cloud formations. But among the more mystical orders, cheese became a confidant. A little dairy oracle tucked away beneath the floorboards, consulted with reverence and a splash of nervous sniffing. You walk now through the gardens behind the monastery, where herbs grow in tidy rows and a cat naps on a sun-warmed wall. A novice monk is carefully transplanting basil from one bed to another. He pauses, glances up at the sky, then at you. "Did Margaret cry this morning?" he asks. You nod. He frowns. "Better bring the linen in early, then. It's embedded in the rhythm of life here." The cheese speaks. The monks listen. And even the youngest among them accepts this without question. But there are quiet debates, behind closed doors and whispered over evening bread. Some monks wonder if the cheese is truly prophetic, or simply reacting, like any organic thing, to the whims of nature. If so, then what's divine about it? Is it God working through curds? Or just the earth doing what it always does? You pass Brother Linus near the cloister fountain. He's scribbling something in a tiny notebook, eyes darting between the sky and a small hunk of cheese balanced precariously on the edge of the basin. Testing for aquatic correlations, he murmurs without looking up. What happens to cheese near moving water before rain? You never know. No. You really don't. As you move on, the breeze carries the faint scent of thyme and damp linen. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls for sext. Time to gather again. Time to check the wheels. And deep below your feet, in the cool belly of the earth, a will named Beatrice begins to sweat, just a little. A whisper of what's to come. The bell chimes echo across the stone walls as you make your way back to the scriptorium, where the monks write, copy, and preserve knowledge, not just the holy sort, but all the oddities of medieval understanding, including their precious cheese-led prophecies. Today, Brother Oswin has called for your help in cataloging the cheese weather manuscripts. He's 83, mildly deaf, and suspiciously fond of sneaking figs during silent hours. The scriptorium smells of ink, old parchment, and very faintly of waxy rinds. In one corner sits a stack of scrolls devoted entirely to case studies of dairy prognostication. You sit beside Oswin, who's muttering about a rogue brie that once lied about the rain. He hands you a scroll titled, Curd Omens and Celestial Alignment. You squint at the delicate script. Apparently, monks believed certain cheeses became more accurate under specific zodiac signs. Capricorn was favorable for cheddar. Pisces made Gouda weepy. The stars softened the soul of cheese, one line reads, though it's unclear whether that's poetic insight or just very sleepy theology. Historians still argue whether the monks genuinely practiced cheese astrology or were just layering beliefs like lasagna. Some scholars suggest it was a blend of desperation and boredom, a medieval storm forecast meets midnight horoscopes. Others insist the monks were experimenting with subtle atmospheric influences long before meteorology existed in any meaningful form. You come across a record from 1297, detailing a phenomenon called the Weeping Feast. That winter, 12 cheeses in the northern cellar simultaneously produced moisture along the Rhine, without changes in temperature or humidity. 3 days later, a freak sleet storm killed 2 pigs, blew a rooster into the chapel, and froze the pond solid enough to skate on. The monks took it as divine validation, and from that point forward, weeping cheese was recorded with almost nervous frequency. Some entries grow increasingly elaborate. One monk claimed that when 3 wheels cried on the same night, it was an omen not just of weather, but of social unrest. Like tears shed before fire, he wrote, though it's unclear whether he was talking about literal rebellion or just an especially loud thunderclap that startled the abbot into dropping his tea. You lean back, blinking at the looping Latin. It's bizarre, yes. But the level of detail is staggering. Charts track temperature against cheese consistency. Inked diagrams illustrate moisture bloom over days. At least one ambitious friar even attempted to graph emotional states of cheese, noting phrases like hesitant texture and sullen rind. You laugh, and Oswin glares at you over his spectacles. It was serious work, he huffs, thumbing a particularly dark wedge of parchment. Cheese remembers more than we do. And perhaps he's right. The monk's obsession with cheese forecasting wasn't just about weather. It was about control. In a world that constantly threatened famine, plague, or Viking raids, being able to predict anything, even with curdled semi-accuracy, was a comfort. It gave structure to the chaos. Like a bedtime routine for a very anxious civilization. You begin transcribing one of the more poetic passages, which reads, "When the moon draws milk upward, and the night breathes damp upon the wheel, then comes the thunder not with rage, but with remorse." It's beautiful. Deeply impractical. But beautiful. You pause as a draft rustles the scroll. Outside, dark clouds gather low on the horizon. A storm brews, quiet, creeping in like an apology. Maybe Beatrice's sweating rind was onto something after all. Oswin tuts. "Should have moved the herbs," he mutters. Then, more conspiratorially, "It's always Beatrice who knows first." Margaret gets jealous. He's not joking. The monks anthropomorphize their wheels with great seriousness. Each cheese has a personality, developed over years of observation. Margaret is dignified, rarely weeps. Beatrice is intuitive, a bit dramatic. Timothy is sweet but easily confused. They track these qualities in records like royal family trees. There's even a tiny chapel alcove with painted faces above a few legendary wheels. One monk's marginalia insists that the Virgin Mary herself appeared in a wedge of blue vein cheese during a lightning storm in 1321. The wheel was later eaten by a starving pilgrim, but the miracle was never revoked. They painted her image anyway, wide-eyed, vaguely mold-colored. You shake your head, amused. But also, a little charmed. In a world before Doppler radar and hourly updates on your phone, this was their meteorology, their mythology, and their way of making peace with nature's unpredictability. Cheese wasn't just food. It was scripture written in dairy. There's one scroll you nearly miss, a narrow one, tucked behind an inkpot and smelling strongly of goat. It's labeled the Forbidden Forecasts. Your heart jumps a little. Forbidden cheese. Finally. You unroll it, careful not to let the brittle edges crumble. Inside are records of predictions the monks weren't allowed to publish, cheese readings that suggested war, death, or inappropriate spiritual moods. One entry reads, Benedicts will shriveled and turned inward, do not speak of this. Another, soft cheese split in 3 before Easter. A bad omen for pilgrims. Delay all travel. These predictions were kept quiet, sometimes suppressed entirely. Not for fear of blasphemy, but because of panic. A wrong word could scatter the faithful or cause unrest in nearby villages. Cheese had power. And power needs management. You hear the wind now, stronger than before. The windows rattle. Rain begins to patter gently on the leaded glass. Oswin sighs, folding his hands. Should have listened to Timothy. You smile. So do you. As the scriptorium darkens, you help Oswin gather the scrolls, gently returning the sacred cheese lore to its shelves. The room smells rich now, rain, ink, age, and faint traces of something sharp and tangy. You realize something strange has happened. You're not laughing at it anymore. Not entirely. You've spent hours immersed in these monks' world, and somehow, their curd-based cosmology makes sense in a weird, sleepy kind of way. Outside, the storm finally arrives, rolling across the countryside like a soft, wet roar. But inside the monastery, the cheese has already told its story. And you? You were listening. You spend the evening listening to the rain rattle against stained glass windows, its rhythm soothing, almost meditative. The monastery quiets, but your thoughts are still rolling, like wheels of cheese stored deep underground, slowly shifting in the dark. There's something about the way this all works, the stillness, the patience, the idea that if you simply watch something long enough, even something as mundane as cheese, it'll eventually reveal secrets. The next day, you're assigned to kitchen duty, which, in this place, means more than chopping vegetables or stirring broth. The kitchen is where culinary theology happens. It's where cheese is not only aged, but interpreted, consumed, and occasionally, interrogated. Brother Malcolm, the cook, believes cheese is best understood when eaten. You taste a storm before it arrives, he says, handing you a soft rind will named Clement. Here. Lick this. You pause. He's serious. You give Clement a hesitant lick. It's earthy, with an odd metallic tang. Malcolm nods solemnly. Lightning. Probably Tuesday. You blink. He moves on to another wheel, tapping it gently with a wooden spoon like a doctor testing reflexes. This one's been humming. Not like Arnold's phantom hum, more of a bowel rumble kind of vibe. You start to laugh, but Malcolm's already scribbling notes onto a bit of parchment with smudged butter on the edge. Don't underestimate digestive portents, he mutters. Historians still argue whether Malcolm's methods had any measurable success. Some records show that his predictions matched the weather half the time, which honestly puts him right in line with your local weather app. Others dismiss him as eccentric, a man who talked to cheese the way poets talk to the moon. But even his critics admit that Malcolm's "taste the storm" doctrine was an oddly holistic approach. You couldn't just look at cheese. You had to listen. Smell. Touch. Even, on occasion, lick. You move to help stack bowls near the hearth, where a pot of lentil stew simmers, smelling of thyme and something tangy. Nearby, a novice is attempting to calm a nervy will named Edith, who apparently split open unexpectedly that morning. She's sensitive to thunder, he explains. You crouch beside her. Edith's pale rind has flaked slightly on one edge. Not dramatic, but enough to stir talk of wind changes. The monks treat her with care, almost reverence, laying a small linen over her like a blanket. This isn't culinary management, it's cheese hospice. And you start to get it. In this place, everything is symbolic. Every cracking rind, every puff of whey, every warm smell rising from a stored will becomes a message. The line between literal and figurative weather forecasting has long since blurred. Cheese is not just an instrument, it's a companion on the journey through the seasons. A diary made of dairy. In the quiet hum of the kitchen, you notice an old chart pinned to a beam. It's color-coded, with columns labeled crack pattern, moisture level, scent notes, and probable atmospheric outcome. Under crack pattern, one drawing shows a spiral fissure labeled the Bishop's Eye. The notes next to it read, rare. Occurs only under extreme humidity and theological tension. Theological tension. You stare. Is the cheese reacting to debates about scripture? Did a wedge curl itself into a tight swirl because someone misquoted Augustine? Apparently, yes. You ask Brother Malcolm about it, and he waves a hand dismissively. That was during the doctrine of two souls dispute. Very tense week. For cheeses split in protest. He's halfway joking. Probably. Still, these monastic cheese observers were surprisingly consistent. Over time, patterns did emerge. Certain wheels reacted to full moons. Others always split when the wind shifted southeast. There's even an entire binder filled with weather predictions made using melting speed. The monks would place cheese on stone plates at dawn and record how long it took to become unbecomingly limp. Slow melt. Dry day. Fast melt. Storm on the way. That one makes actual sense. Temperature affects softness. The monks weren't entirely off their rockers, they just explained it in the most poetically elaborate way imaginable. Instead of high humidity, it was the cheese grieved under the weight of warm breath. There's a kind of magic in it. Not the wand-waving sort. But the slow, quiet magic of watching, of caring deeply about something small and seemingly insignificant. Of recording its behavior day after day, trusting that eventually, it will tell you a truth bigger than itself. At Vespers, you sit beside Brother Alaric, who has the perpetually startled look of someone who just remembered he left a candle burning somewhere. He whispers, "Did you hear about Winifred?" You shake your head. "She sighed this morning." You pause. Sighed? He nods solemnly. "When I lifted the linen, a small puff of air escaped. Warm. Defiant. Like a tired nun with secrets." You try not to laugh. He's serious. And so are the others. The monks take turns visiting Winifred throughout the evening, as if she's a holy relic. Each one sniffs, pokes, or hums near her rind to see if she responds. No one's quite sure what her exhalation means. Some think rain. Others say thunder. A few believe she's simply exhausted. You think maybe, she's lonely. That night, back in your little cell with its single candle and scratchy wool blanket, you think of all the cheese you've met. The sacred wheels. The forgotten scraps. The ones that hummed. The ones that cried. You wonder, did they really predict anything? Or were the monks simply seeing reflections of themselves in the curd? Maybe the cheese isn't forecasting the world outside. Maybe it's forecasting us. In the dark, thunder rolls softly over the hills. A breeze stirs your curtain. Somewhere below, in the belly of the monastery, a will called Winifred dreams of storm. Morning breaks with a fog that seems reluctant, like it, too, stayed up too late reading cheese. You wake to the usual clatter of bells, shuffle through prayers with half-closed eyes, and find yourself drawn, almost involuntarily, back to the cellar. By now, you know the path without thinking, past the herb garden where a single slug always claims the same stone, down the steps slick with moss, through the wooden door with a handle worn smooth by 1,000 curious hands. Inside, it smells of thyme. Damp, quiet thyme. Brother Percival is already there, wrapped in layers against the cellar chill, gently brushing a coat of white bloom off a wheel of ash-rubbed goat cheese named Theophilus. Theophilus is temperamental. Last spring, he cracked 3 times and shrank into himself like a philosopher after a bad sermon. But today, he's steady. Calm. Almost smug. There's a rhythm to it, Percival says as you settle beside him. The cheese listens. Then it responds. Slowly. Like the weather. Like God. You nod, unsure whether to offer a theological follow-up or just a warm hum. You go with the hum. Safer. Today's task is mapping moisture pockets. Each wheel is poked in 3 places, north, south, and center. Notes are taken, compared to previous records, and added to the weigh table, an oversized ledger the width of a garden bench. It's filled with lines of cramped Latin, cryptic abbreviations, and occasional doodles of what may be saints, or mice. Historians still debate whether the weigh table was ever accurate or merely an exercise in obsessive data hoarding. Some call it the first analog barometer disguised as a lunch menu. Others dismiss it entirely, suggesting the monks were simply bored and very, very lactose-saturated. But when you run your finger down the columns and see patterns repeating, melts on feast days, rinds tightening before wind shifts, it's hard not to believe there's something here. Something ancient. Something sincere. Percival shows you a curious entry dated March 1312, all wheels in the southern aisle grew stiff overnight. Sky remained clear. But 5 days later, the bishop's mule slipped on frost. Coincidence? Next to it, someone has drawn a small, concerned donkey with a question mark above its head. You grin. The monks had humor. Quiet, dry humor like the cellar air itself. As you continue poking and noting, you notice something odd about a small, neglected cheese in the corner, Matilda. She's newer, untested, ignored. But this morning, she's begun to tilt, ever so slightly, to the east. No moisture. No cracking. Just a lean, like she's eavesdropping on the wind. Percival frowns. She wasn't like that yesterday. You both watch in silence. She doesn't move, of course. Cheese rarely performs on cue. But her shift is undeniable. Put it in the log, he says, and you do. Matilda leans eastward. Purpose unclear. Watching. You'll check on her tomorrow. Later, you find yourself assigned to cheese meditation, which sounds ridiculous until you actually do it. You sit in the cloister, eyes half shut, holding a small wheel of camembert on your lap. You breathe slowly. You listen. Not just to the cheese, of course, but to the world around it, wind in the trees, birds wheeling in the sky, distant chimes from the chapel. The cheese is just your anchor. Some monks claim they can feel weather changes through this practice. One swore he sensed a thunderstorm in his kneecaps the moment a cheddar turned waxy in his hands. Another said the rind of an alpine cheese once sent him into a 3-hour trance and a vision of Saint Scholastica on a flying cow. You don't expect revelations. But as you sit there, still, the cheese warms in your hands. It softens slightly. And you feel, just faintly, that something is shifting in the air. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's dairy-based enlightenment. But you're oddly comforted. After meditation, you're handed a small slate to draw your cheese impressions. Yours ends up looking like a lopsided moon with freckles, and you label it, Camembert reflects the inner fog. Brother Julian, who runs the practice, nods approvingly and tells you you've captured the Rhine's emotional ambiguity. You're not sure whether to be proud or concerned. Lunch that day features several of the morning's cheeses, including Matilda, who is spared the knife due to her active lean. You take this as both kindness and scientific necessity. Over the meal, the monks share cheese tales. One tells of a wheel that once mimicked the phases of the moon over a month, cracking, flaking, even glowing faintly in silver mold. Another recalls a cheese that exploded during a heat wave, with such violence it shattered a relic box and briefly interrupted prayer. Exploding cheese. Now there's a warning system. You learn about cheese omens, peculiar formations or discolorations considered signs. A cross-shaped mold bloom might mean blessing. A spiral crack signals confusion. A rind that peels like petals. Definitely a flood. Never trust a floral cheddar, someone mutters, and everyone nods. It's funny, how deeply this logic runs here. How weather and dairy have become so intertwined that even accidents are catalogued like miracles. If a wheel collapses during a windstorm, it's not just damage, it's testimony. You think of modern life, where weather alerts pop up on screens, where barometers hum silently on rooftops. There's something cold about it. Efficient, sure. But cold. Here, a storm has flavor. Texture. Story. That evening, you sneak one last look at Matilda before retiring. She's still tilted. Still watching. You leave a tiny crumb beside her, as thanks. Outside, the clouds gather again, soft and low and full of promise. Inside, the cheese dreams on. The storm arrives just before dawn, tiptoeing in like a cat that owns the place. First a whispering wind, curling around corners. Then the distant roll of thunder, not angry, just clearing its throat. By the time you're brushing your teeth with minty salt paste, don't ask, the sky has split open and begun pouring itself over the cloistered world. Rain taps on stone like curious fingers. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings, not for prayer, but for cheese. You rush to the cellar. It's a habit now. Your feet know the path better than your mind. Down the mossy stairs, past the tiny spiderweb you've begun naming residents of, through the heavy door. Inside, it's cooler than usual. The air is heavy, like it's carrying something. Matilda is still tilted. And now, she's sweating. Tiny beads of moisture have gathered on her rind, just enough to catch the light of your lantern. You exhale slowly, the way the monks do when they spot a sign. She's gone damp, says Brother Percival, appearing behind you like a ghost wrapped in wool. Storm front confirmed. And sure enough, the weigh table shows multiple damp entries. Winifred has bulged slightly. Arnold has hummed, though possibly from the vibrations of the thunder. Even Stoic Clement has a pale crack along his flank, a crescent shape, almost like a smile. You begin recording it all. The monks gather with quiet purpose, each handling their assigned wheels with gentle, practiced hands. Brother Malcolm takes a bite out of one and closes his eyes. Walnut aftertaste, he murmurs. Storm with a westward drift. Historians still debate whether cheese really reacts to storms, or if it simply reflects changes already in the air, temperature shifts, humidity, pressure. Modern science says cheese is a sponge for microclimates, and in these damp, porous monasteries, microclimates are as dramatic as stage plays. But in the 1300s, none of that language existed. What they saw was cheese becoming anxious before the heavens roared. That was enough. As the monks move through their rituals, you notice how calm they are, not despite the storm, but because of it. It's confirmation. The cheese said rain would come. The rain came. Order preserved. Pattern validated. Comfort wrapped in curd. Later, when the storm peaks, you and Brother Julian sit by a narrow window in the scriptorium, watching rain slice the sky into vertical ribbons. He's illuminating a text, a psalter, but he stops to tell you about the Great Gouda incident. You're intrigued. Apparently, during an unusually aggressive thunderstorm in 1289, a batch of imported Dutch cheese began moaning. Not squeaking. Not shifting. Moaning. Deep, sustained, mournful. The monks thought it was possessed. They tried prayer. They tried salt. Nothing worked until the storm passed, then the cheese fell silent, and a single crack split its rind like a mouth closing. Julian swears he heard the sound once on pilgrimage. It was like hearing a cow sing through a cave. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether it was pressure differential or mass hysteria, he adds. I say both. Back in the cellar, Matilda has drawn attention. Her lean has become a tilt. The monks, ever respectful, decide to place a small support block beneath her. She's had a long day, someone says. You nod, solemnly. Winifred, meanwhile, has begun to show signs of flaring, a subtle outward puffing near her rind's edges. She's catching the eastern gusts, Brother Malcolm explains. You look to the walls where tiny threads of air slip in through old mortar cracks. Cheese, you realize, is not sealed from the world. It's in dialogue with it. Constantly. Quietly. This awareness grows in you. How everything here listens. The cheese, the stones, even the silence. Nothing is passive. Nothing merely exists. You begin to trust the cheese. That night, the rain lulls into a softer rhythm, and you lie awake thinking about moisture levels. About how the monks once tried to measure dew accumulation on rind with single horsehairs stretched across the surface. If the hair curled, it was considered a humid portent. If it remained straight, tranquility ahead. You remember the horsehair experiment, and you smile. It's absurd. And beautiful. You drift off like that, brain full of cheese and cloud, wrapped in wool and thunder. The next morning is clear. Birds are louder than usual, like they've been waiting their turn. Sunlight dances on puddles. You hurry to the cellar. Matilda is upright. Completely level. No tilt. No sweat. Just calm. Balanced, says Percival, with quiet awe. She knew it would pass. You pat her gently, like one would a faithful dog or an elder who just told a good story. The cellar smells different today. Fresh. Not clean, exactly, this is still a room full of fermenting dairy, but hopeful. The way a place smells after truth has passed through it and left its coat on the hook. Brother Malcolm hands you a fresh will to mark. Its name is Norbert. You weigh him, test his bounce, log his scent. And from somewhere in the monastery, a bell rings, not for prayer, but for prediction. A new weather cycle begins. A week passes. Not in a hurry, nothing here ever is, but with a steady rhythm, like the slow churn of butter or the swing of incense in the chapel. You settle into the monastic cheese and weather life almost too easily. It's peaceful. It's repetitive. It's weirdly satisfying. You now know the names of nearly every cheese in the cellar, which is more than you can say for half the monks. There's Lucinda, prone to mild rashes of blue mold when rain lingers, Gerard, who develops a surprising floral note right before the fog rolls in, and Agatha, the quiet star of the batch, who seems to remain perfectly balanced until, without fail, 3 days before a cold snap, when she abruptly softens in the center like an emotional peach. You're also growing skilled with the way table. Your handwriting has shifted into a passable imitation of medieval script, and your entries include things like Theodoric bloomed early. Suspect east winds, and Ethel cracks inwards equals possible frost by end of week. Brother Julian, who oversees the table, says you're a natural. Then he squints at your drawing of a cheese that resembles a moody frog and adds, though your iconography is still heretical. You're not sure if he's joking. Today's task is more advanced, cheese whispering. No, seriously. You're taken into the inner chamber, more of a pantry, really, but with an air of secrecy. Here, the monastery keeps its oldest, most temperamental wheels. These are the prophets, cheeses too unstable to eat, too powerful to ignore. Some are wrapped in linen. Others sit on wooden cradles. One is stored in a ceramic jar sealed with beeswax and labeled simply, Gregory. Do not unplug. You're warned not to speak too loudly. Or breathe too heavily. The cheeses here are sensitive. Brother Percival assigns you to Hildegard, a dense, ash-covered round that allegedly predicted a minor flood in 1296 by growing veins in the shape of the River Ouse. She doesn't speak often, he says, but when she does, it's with purpose. You sit with her in silence. You watch. You breathe. And slowly, you begin to notice things. Her surface isn't smooth, it's textured like a dried riverbed. She's cooler on the left side. Her scent, once sharp, has mellowed into something earthy. She smells like wet stone and hay and thyme. You write it all down, not because you know what it means, but because someone, someday, might. Historians still argue whether any of these prophetic cheeses actually foretold anything. Some say monks retrofitted the signs after events occurred. Others claim the records were embellished to impress abbots or scare off thieves. But in the margins of the way table, you sometimes find corrections. Revisions. Honest uncertainty. Hildegard bloomed prematurely. Mistaken for fog. Apologies. That kind of humility doesn't sound like fraud. It sounds like faith. You wonder what kind of weather you might predict, if someone watched you closely enough. Would your hair frizz before a storm? Would your bones ache before frost? Would your mood soften on humid days like a wheel of brie in July? Cheese, after all, is just milk that's been through something. And so are you. Later, you help prepare for the coming solstice festival. It's not the kind of raucous celebration people imagine. No feasting or dancing. Just a quiet, reverent display of the seasonal cheeses, the monastery's best forecasters, arranged on a long wooden table beneath a woven tapestry of the four winds. Each cheese is paired with a written observation. Some are surprisingly poetic. She cracked before lightning like a heart too full. Softened at dusk, hardened by dawn, storm passed in shadows. Visitors from nearby villages come to view the cheeses, to ask for weather guidance. One farmer places his hand gently on a small round named Trudy and whispers, "Tell me when to sow." The monks don't scold him. They just smile. You realize the cheese is more than a tool here. It's a bridge, between the known and the guessed, the sky and the soil, the monks and their neighbors. It's not about accuracy. It's about attention. Modern science might laugh. And fair enough, your phone can tell you when it'll rain next Thursday. But your phone won't tell you how the storm feels. Or how the rind on Beatrice curls in tension before hail. You return to the cellar that evening with a new kind of reverence. Not worship, exactly, but awareness. You're not just looking anymore, you're listening. And the cheese, for its part, seems to notice. Matilda, your old friend, gives off a faint citrus note tonight. Which is new. Humidity's rising, says Percival behind you. Storm coming. You shrug. Could be. Or maybe she's just having a moment. You both laugh. Quietly. Respectfully. So Matilda won't hear. There's a quiet magic to routine. You wake, you stretch, you nod solemnly at the chapel's damp stone archway, and you descend into the cellar. Cheese. Weather. Cheese. Again. Yet each repetition unfolds with subtle change, like pages in a diary that look the same from a distance but contain wildly different moods. Today, something's off. You feel it the moment you step into the cellar. It's colder than usual, and the air smells sharp. Not in a bad way, just more intense. Like old apples or a forest floor just before it rains. The cheeses are restless. Matilda's rind has puckered slightly, drawing tiny folds along her flanks. Winifred is unusually spongy to the touch. Arnold hums again, but this time, the tone is lower, like he's mourning something. Brother Julian frowns. This, he mutters, is not normal behavior for a Tuesday. You log everything in the weigh table, your ink strokes slower now, thoughtful. These aren't just observations. They're breadcrumbs in a trail you don't quite understand. You write. All wheels reacting preemptively. No current meteorological confirmation. Awaiting convergence. The other monks are unsettled too, though no one says it outright. It's in their eyes. In the way they glance toward the sky through narrow windows as if expecting it to blink first. And then it comes, the news. A merchant arriving from the coast tells of strange tidal shifts. Fish washing ashore. Weathered sailors refusing to sail, claiming the sea smells wrong. You glance at Hildegard. Her veins have darkened. Something's building. Historians still argue whether the cheese panic of 1334 was genuine foresight or mass delusion. The monastery records describe a week of increasingly erratic cheese behavior followed by a sudden inland squall that leveled several nearby villages. Others suggest there was no storm at all, just fear, fermented and contagious, like mold in a sealed room. But you're here. You're watching it. And you're starting to believe. Brother Percival convenes a Rhine Council, a term you'd have laughed at 2 weeks ago but now seems both perfectly reasonable and slightly overdue. Senior monks gather, bringing their most reactive wheels. They sniff, prod, tilt, even chant. You're asked to monitor the cellar while they confer. You agree. It's quiet, except for the occasional creak from the rafters and the soft, steady breath of fermenting dairy. Then, a sound. Not a crack or a squeak. A sigh. You freeze. It came from Gregory. Yes, that Gregory. The wax-sealed jar you were specifically told not to unplug. The sigh is long. Resigned. You do not unplug him. Obviously. Instead, you light more candles and place them around him in a protective circle of warmth and plausible deniability. That's called spiritual risk management. That evening, you attend a lecture in the scriptorium. Brother Julian, once a scholar at Oxford before he found the mold, gives a talk on cheese as a cultural mirror. He argues that cheese isn't just food or forecast, it's reflection. It absorbs your world and throws it back at you in edible metaphor. Cracked rinds, he says, in times of fracture. Bloom in times of fertility. Bitterness in famine. Excess whey during unrest. You ask whether cheese could be reflecting emotional climates as well. He pauses. Historians still argue that, too. The wind howls that night. No rain, no lightning. Just wind. Relentless. Like the sky exhaling in discomfort. And the cheeses don't calm. Matilda now leans in a new direction. A direction no one recognizes. Hildegard is silent, which is worse than moaning. Trudy has split. Not from aging, but from pressure. Time to build the shelf, says Percival, almost like a prayer. The shelf is a sacred object in the monastery. Not a literal shelf, but a symbolic arrangement, a selection of the 5 most volatile wheels, stacked by elemental association: earth, hardest rind; water, most moisture; air, lightest scent; fire, sharpest bite; and spirit, most unpredictable behavior. You assist in its construction. It's quiet, reverent. You place Matilda in the water position. No one questions it. When it's done, the monks gather in silent formation. They kneel. They wait. Then, drip. A single bead of whey escapes from the spirit wheel, Eustace. It falls onto the wood. A second follows. A third. The storm hits at dawn. No warning. Just force. It isn't rain. It's wind, of a kind you've never known. Windows rattle. Roofs creak. Trees lean in confession. The chapel bell rings once, then goes silent, rope snapped mid-swing. Inside the cellar, the cheeses tremble. But they're not afraid. They've been waiting. And so have you. There's a strange beauty in it. The convergence of observation and experience. Of faith and data. The monks aren't panicking. They're watching. Recording. Validating. You understand now why this place endures. Why the whey table keeps growing. Not because cheese can predict the weather, but because watching it reminds you to look for patterns, to trust your senses, to feel the shape of what's coming before it comes. By nightfall, the winds ease. No lives lost. Just one shed blown clear into the river, and a flock of startled sheep still shaking it off like a bad haircut. Matilda is level again. Eustace has dried. Gregory remains sealed, thank you very much. You add your notes to the whey table. You draw the wind as a swirl. You mark the shelf in gold ink. And then you rest. Knowing tomorrow, the cheese will still be here. And you'll still be listening. Dawn creeps through narrow windows, stretching pale fingers across the ancient stone floors. You rise, tired but strangely content, wrapped in the soft, persistent hum of monastery life. The storm passed, but it left behind a residue, a tension in the air, like static before a thunderclap you don't hear. Your footsteps echo in the cellar as you approach the whey table. The cheeses lie in their familiar places, but something has changed. They seem quieter. More introspective. Like the calm after a long conversation. You pick up Matilda, feeling her firmness. Steady. Reliable. You can almost hear her say, well, that was something. You smile to yourself. Monks might worship saints, you've come to revere Kurds. Brother Percival appears, balancing a small wooden box. A gift from the abbess, he says, setting it down. From the northern monastery of Saint Chevre. You open it carefully. Inside, nestled in straw, are ancient parchment scrolls, whether diaries penned by monks hundreds of years ago. The ink is faded but the words glow with life. You unroll the first and find detailed accounts of cheese observations linked to weather events. When Bernardine's rind bloomed with blue dots, the river rose 3 spans. After the sharp crack in Celeste, a frost came that withered the barley. You trace the script with your finger. The handwriting shifts between careful script and rushed notes, as if some observations were made in the middle of a storm. One entry catches your eye, cheese predicts, but so does the silence between. You read it aloud to Percival. He nods slowly. They believed the pauses, the quiet moments, were just as telling as the signs on the rind. It makes sense. Sometimes, what's not happening speaks louder than what is. You spend the afternoon immersed in these scrolls. They're a treasure trove of medieval meteorology, but more importantly, a window into how monks sought to understand a world far less predictable than ours. No satellite images. No Doppler radar. Just cheese, stone, sky, and faith. Historians still argue whether these diaries were practical records or symbolic meditations. Some say the monks exaggerated to impress the abbess or protect their monastery's reputation. Others believe these writings were genuine attempts to map the rhythms of nature. Whatever the truth, the scrolls deepen your respect for the humble Kurd. That evening, the monks gather in the refectory for the solstice supper. Candles flicker against wooden beams. The air is thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, hearty stew, and, of course, cheese. You nibble on a slice of spiced cheddar, its warmth spreading slowly through you. Brother Julian raises a glass of fermented apple cider. To the cheeses who speak, and to the ones who listen. You catch Percival's eye. There's a shared smile, one forged from nights in the cellar and storms weathered together. Later, you lie in your modest cell, the parchment scrolls stacked neatly on your desk. Outside, the wind whispers softly, carrying promises and memories. You close your eyes, the faintest hint of cheese still lingering in the air. Tomorrow, you'll return to the cellar. Because in this place, history isn't just something you read about. It's something you live. The days slip by like melted butter sliding off a warm crust, smooth and inevitable. You settle into the rhythms of the monastery, the quiet rituals around the cheese and weather becoming as familiar as your own heartbeat. One morning, the cellar air carries a strange new scent. Not the usual earthy musk of aging curds, but something floral, almost sweet. You follow it, nose twitching like a hound on a trail, until you reach a forgotten corner where a small well-named Rosalind rests beneath a thick layer of dust. Rosalind has been quiet for years, almost ignored. But today, her rind is glowing faintly with a pinkish hue. You call Brother Julian over, who examines her carefully. A bloom of wild yeast, he muses. Rare in this climate. Could signal a shift. It's the first time you've seen a cheese change without a corresponding weather event. The air is still. The sky is clear. No winds, no rain. Historians still argue whether such unexpected cheese blooms were anomalies or messages. Some believe they were signs of spiritual unrest, others mere natural quirks. You jot down your observations with a growing sense of wonder. Maybe cheese isn't just a weather predictor. Maybe it's a mirror of the world's mysteries, visible in curds and rinds. That afternoon, a traveling scholar arrives, seeking knowledge about the monastery's unique weather practices. She carries a leather satchel filled with manuscripts, instruments, and a curious, modern device she calls a barometer. You listen as she explains how air pressure predicts storms, how clouds form, how patterns emerge in the atmosphere. It's science, distilled into neat equations and instruments. Yet, when she handles the cheeses, there's a pause. A moment of hesitation, as if something intangible lingers beyond her data. You share your notes, your stories of cheese rinds cracking before storms, of whey thickening with humidity, of the ancient scrolls that connect observation to faith. She smiles. Perhaps, she says softly, there's room for both, science and spirit. That night, you dream of a world where cheese speaks the language of weather and where ancient wisdom dances with modern knowledge. You imagine monks and scientists sharing a quiet cellar, listening together to the whispers of curds and clouds. And when you wake, you feel the faintest ripple in the air, a promise of change. You return to the whey table, ready to listen. Winter is coming, and with it, a slow transformation. The monastery's stone walls seem to thicken against the cold, and the cellar grows more silent, as if the cheeses themselves are holding their breath. You notice it first in Cedric, a will usually robust and loud with fruity notes. Now, he's shrunken and dull, his rind cracked like a parched riverbed. The monks speak in hushed tones about the winter rind, a phenomenon where cheeses become strangely inert, almost withdrawn, mirroring the earth's dormancy. Some say it's a natural pause, a time for the curds to conserve strength. Others whisper that the cheeses dream, entering a state beyond human understanding. You're assigned to monitor Cedric closely. His slow decay fascinates you. You measure the moisture, note the shift in aroma, and sketch the map of cracks that spiderweb across his surface. One evening, as frost gathers outside, a question tugs at your mind. What if the cheeses are not just reflecting the weather, but feeling it? Historians still argue whether medieval monks saw cheese as a passive instrument or as a living participant in nature's cycle. Was it a simple tool, or a sacred symbol of interconnectedness? You ponder this as you kneel beside Cedric, fingertips brushing his fragile rind. It's cold, almost brittle. You imagine the cold sinking into his heart, the chill spreading slowly like a whispered secret. That night, you dream of being a wheel of cheese yourself, formed from the earth, shaped by air and time, vulnerable yet resilient. In the dream, you feel every change in temperature, every shift in moisture. You understand the slow dance of freeze and thaw, the tension between stillness and movement. You wake with a start, the image of a cracked rind burned into your mind. Winter will test everything. But so will you. Outside, the world is quiet. But inside the monastery, the cheese waits. And so do you. Spring arrives with a tentative warmth, coaxing life back into the monastery's weathered stones and the hidden cellar. You watch as the cheeses respond, like old friends waking from a deep slumber. Cedric's cracked rind softens, a pale bloom of mold appearing like a silver veil. It's as if he's breathing again, sighing into the new season. The scent is sharper, more vibrant, green grass and fresh rain. You take a moment to savor it, the scent wrapping around you like a gentle breeze through open fields. The monks are busy preparing for the annual Cheese Blessing Festival, a tradition that blends faith, folklore, and, of course, a generous helping of dairy. It's a curious mix of ceremony and celebration, where cheese wheels are paraded, prayers are whispered, and local farmers bring offerings of milk and honey. You find yourself caught between reverence and amusement. The solemnity of the prayers, the earnestness of the rituals, contrasted with the giggles of novices trying to balance wheels on their heads. One elder monk explains to you that the festival is more than just a ceremony, it's a way to honor the cycle of nature and the humble role cheese plays within it. We don't control the weather, he says, but we respect its voice, and cheese is one way to listen. During the festivities, you notice a peculiar practice. The monks offer pieces of cheese to the sky, holding them up as if presenting gifts to unseen forces. You ask why. It's an ancient gesture, the elder replies. A way to show gratitude and ask for balance. Historians still argue whether these rituals influenced medieval weather beliefs or were later additions meant to maintain community cohesion. Regardless, they endure, a testament to the blend of practical knowledge and spiritual meaning. As night falls and the last candle flickers out, you sit alone in the cellar, surrounded by the cheeses that have become your silent companions. You realize that this place is less about predicting weather and more about being with it, learning patience, humility, and the strange comfort of uncertainty. Tomorrow, the seasons will continue their dance. And so will you. The sun has shifted noticeably, casting longer shadows through the cloister's arches. You move through the monastery with a quiet purpose, the weight of seasons and centuries pressing gently on your shoulders. Today, you're tasked with an unusual experiment. Brother Julian, ever the scholar, proposes a trial, comparing the monks' cheese observations with emerging meteorological data from nearby towns. They've sent messengers bearing reports of barometric pressure, wind patterns, and temperature charts, numbers and graphs foreign to your world of rinds and whey. You gather the cheeses and the data, laying them side by side on the work table. Arnold's moaning intensifies on days when the barometer falls. Hildegard's veins darken with rising humidity readings. The old scrolls, the modern reports, the cheeses, they begin to tell a story not unlike a whispered conversation across time. You note your findings carefully, aware that this blend of science and tradition might be the key to understanding. Yet, even as data aligns, something eludes you. One evening, a heated discussion erupts among the monks. Some argue that relying on instruments undermines centuries of sacred observation. Others contend that embracing new knowledge honors the monastery's spirit of inquiry. Historians still argue whether medieval monasteries were purely spiritual centers or early hubs of scientific thought. Perhaps they were both, places where faith and reason coexisted uneasily but productively. You find yourself caught in the middle, feeling the tension but also the promise. In the quiet hours before dawn, you return to the cellar. The cheeses rest peacefully, oblivious to human debate. You reach out, touch a rind, and smile softly. No matter how much changes, whether it's parchment scrolls or digital data, the essence remains. listening, watching, waiting, and, occasionally, learning to trust a wheel of cheese more than a weather vane. The monastery feels older now, not just because of time, but because of everything you've seen, smelled, and felt. The seasons have cycled through, the cheeses have spoken their quiet truths, and the storms have rumbled past like ancient echoes. Tonight, you stand by the open window of your cell, watching the stars trace slow arcs across a velvet sky. The cool night air drifts in, carrying faint whispers of the earth, soft, persistent, and comforting. You think back to that first storm, the raucous thunder, the crackling lightning, and the curd that predicted it all. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet the connection remains as vivid as ever. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly believed cheese could predict weather or if it was a clever metaphor for deeper truths. But for you, it doesn't matter. What matters is the quiet ritual, the patient observation, the faith in something simple and strange. You run your fingers along the wooden sill, imagining the countless hands that have done the same. There's a profound comfort in this continuity, a reminder that even in the most uncertain times, people have sought patterns, stories, and signs to make sense of the world. And sometimes, those signs come wrapped in rinds and aging curds. You close your eyes, the faint aroma of cheese mingling with night air, and feel a gentle calm settle over you. The storm has passed. The cheese has spoken. And now, it's time for rest. The night deepens, and the world grows softer, quieter. Imagine the monastery bathed in moonlight, the stones cool and silent beneath a sky full of stars. Your breath slows, matching the gentle rhythm of the earth as it turns beneath you. The scents of ancient wood, fresh air, and lingering cheese mingle into a warm, familiar embrace. It's a quiet comfort, like a story whispered just for you, meant to lull you gently into sleep. Remember the monks, their patient watch, the cheeses that listen and speak in their own secret language. Let the idea settle like soft snow on a windowsill, still, peaceful, serene. You've traveled through storms and seasons, through the curious and the sacred, and now you rest. Let your mind drift, carried on the slow turning of time, cradled by history's soft hand. Soon, the morning will come with new light and new stories, but for now, the world is hushed. Breathe deeply, slowly, and let the quiet wrap around you like a warm blanket. Good night, and sweet dreams.